Sorry, I was removing mistletoe from the confessional. Some young couple must have had fun last night.
I'll never do it again, Father.
Occupation high fashion model. Come on.
Forget the classics. Today, we conduct a glorious autopsy on the Hindenburgs with laugh tracks. These are the baffling 70s and 80s sitcoms that crashed and burned so spectacularly they left craters in the primetime schedule. These weren't just flops. They were legendary disasters. And we have the receipts. First, Supertrain. Let's kick things off with the undisputed heavyweight champion of television flops, the gold standard by which all other disasters are measured. Supertrain wasn't just a sitcom, it was a genre-defying thing. Imagine the pitch meeting at NBC. Fellas, it's the Love Boat, but on land. No, wait, it's on rails, and it's not just any train. It's a nuclear-powered bullet train that rockets from New York to LA in 36 hours. It'll have a swimming pool, a full-service disco, a state-of-the-art medical center, and C-list guest stars getting into wacky shenanigans. What could possibly go wrong? The answer, it turned out, was everything. Literally everything. NBC, under the leadership of the legendary Fred Silverman, poured a then-unheard-of $10 million into this behemoth, which is like $1 billion in today's money. They built massive, elaborate sets that were an absolute nightmare to film on, creating a perpetually cramped and chaotic environment. The expensive train model itself, the star of the show, repeatedly crashed during effects shots, a beautiful piece of foreshadowing for its own fate. The writing was a schizophrenic mess, veering wildly from goofy comedy to serious drama without warning. 1 minute, characters were having a heartfelt conversation about their life choices. The next, someone was getting eliminated in the disco car while a Bee Gees sound-alike played. The show was a ratings catastrophe from its very first run, hemorrhaging viewers and money at an astonishing rate. It was retooled halfway through its brief 9-episode run, but it was like putting a Band-Aid on a torpedo wound. Supertrain nearly bankrupted NBC and became a legendary cautionary tale in Hollywood about the dangers of hubris and building a show around a prop instead of a plot. 2. Hello, Larry.
Marion, I've got to get to work. Look, I'll call you later and we can fight when the rates are lower.
Imagine you're a network executive in 1979. You have one of the biggest hits on television, Different Strokes, a show that prints money. How do you capitalize on it? Naturally, you create a spin-off, but instead of spinning off a beloved character like Mrs. Garrett, you create a whole new show about a random divorced radio host named Larry Alder, played by McLean Stevenson, and then desperately try to convince America that he's part of the Different Strokes universe. That was the doomed, sweat-drenched premise of Hello, Larry. The show saw Larry move to Portland, Oregon to host a phone-in talk show while raising his 2 teenage daughters. To give it a ratings boost, the network shoehorned in crossover after crossover with a shamelessness that was almost performance art. Philip Drummond, the millionaire dad from Different Strokes, would just happen to fly to Portland for business. Arnold and Willis would show up for no discernible reason. In one infamous episode, a plot point was invented out of thin air where Arnold reveals that he owns the radio station Larry works for. The constant, desperate crossovers had the opposite effect. Instead of making audiences like Hello, Larry, it made them resent it for leeching off a show they actually enjoyed. It became a national punchline, synonymous with failure. It was so famously bad that Johnny Carson made jokes about it nearly every night on The Tonight Show. It limped along for 2 seasons, a walking, talking monument to the fact that you can't force an audience to love a show, no matter how many times you have Gary Coleman show up to deliver a catchphrase. 3. Pink Lady and Jeff.
We wanted to speak perfect English when we got here.
Oh, and you speak English too?
Yes. Do you?
Get ready, because this is one of the most bizarre fever dreams ever broadcast on American television. In the late 70s, Pink Lady was a hugely popular female pop duo from Japan, known for their catchy tunes and synchronized dance moves. An NBC executive saw them on a Japanese TV show and, in a moment of pure, unadulterated hubris, and without checking if they could speak a word of English, decided to give them their own American primetime variety show. What could possibly go wrong? They hired comedian Jeff Altman to be the American co-host, the designated handler for this bizarre experiment. The resulting show, Pink Lady and Jeff, was a surreal 6-episode train wreck. The two singers, Me and Kay, had learned all of their lines phonetically, so they delivered jokes with the bewildered terror of hostages reading a ransom note. The comedy sketches were baffling, the musical numbers were out of place, and the central gimmick was watching three people with zero chemistry try to communicate. The set looked like a low-budget sci-fi movie's idea of a nightclub. One of the show's recurring gags was having the ladies jump into a hot tub at the end of every episode. Why? Nobody knew. It was never explained. The show was a ratings disaster of epic proportions and was canceled after just 5 weeks, leaving behind a legacy so weird, so fundamentally misconceived that it's almost brilliant. 4. Me and the Chimp.
You feel all right?
Yep.
You want to talk about anything?
No.
It's like talking to Gary Cooper.
Before he was a legendary comedian, Gary Shandling was a young sitcom writer. And one of the very first shows he wrote for was Me and the Chimp, a sitcom created by Gary Marshall, the television genius behind Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. The premise? A dentist named Mike Reynolds, played by Ted Bessel, finds a chimpanzee who has escaped from an Air Force Space Research Center. Instead of returning the multi-million-dollar government asset, he brings it home to live with his wife and 2 kids, naming him Buttons. You can already see the problem. The entire show revolved around Buttons, the chimp, causing predictable slapstick chaos, and Mike, the dad, trying to hide him from their nosy neighbors and the 2 Air Force colonels who were constantly, ineptly searching for their missing primate. It was a one-joke show, and that joke was, haha, the monkey is making a mess. The laugh track would roar with manufactured delight every time Buttons put on a hat, rode a tricycle through the living room, or threw a pie. The show was critically savaged and universally ignored by audiences who apparently demanded slightly more from their television than primate-based property damage. It was canceled after just 13 agonizing episodes, serving as a powerful lesson that just because you can put a chimpanzee in a sitcom doesn't mean you should. It remains a strange, forgotten footnote in the careers of 2 comedy legends who thankfully went on to do much, much better things. 5. Joanie Loves Chachi.
I say we're adults. I say we can make our own decisions. I say we leave through the bathroom window.
I'm glad we're adults, Chachi.
Happy Days was a ratings juggernaut, a cultural phenomenon that defined an era of television. So, when 2 of its popular young characters, the sweet Joanie Cunningham and the impossibly cool Chachi Arcola, got together, the network saw dollar signs the size of beach balls. They decided to spin them off into their own show, Joanie Loves Chachi, which saw the young couple move to Chicago to pursue their dreams of rock and roll stardom. They started a band, got a record deal with suspicious ease, and navigated the ups and downs of young love and the cutthroat music business. On paper, it seemed like a can't-miss money-printing idea. In reality, it was an absolute disaster. Separated from the warm, familiar world of Arnold's Drive-In and the comforting presence of the Cunningham family, Joanie and Chachi just weren't that interesting. Their personalities, which worked perfectly in a supporting capacity, weren't strong enough to carry a series. The musical numbers, which were a key part of the show, felt forced and cheesy, like a bad imitation of a much better band. The show lacked the nostalgic charm of its parent. It turns out that while audiences liked Joanie and Chachi, they didn't love them enough to watch them every week. The ratings were a huge disappointment, and the show was mercy killed after just 2 seasons. The characters were then awkwardly reintegrated back into Happy Days, with their entire Chicago adventure rarely mentioned again, like a weird, embarrassing vacation everyone tacitly agreed to forget. 6. AfterMASH.
Sorry, I was removing mistletoe from the confessional. Some young couple must have had fun last night.
I'll never do it again, Father.
Ending MASH, one of the most beloved, critically acclaimed and successful television shows of all time, was a monumental task. The finale drew an audience of over 125 million people, a record that will likely never be broken. Creating a spin-off in the shadow of that legacy wasn't just ambitious, it was borderline insane. But CBS, never one to let a cash cow go unmilked, did it anyway. AfterMASH picked up right after the Korean War ended, following the post-war lives of 3 supporting characters from the original series: the lovable Colonel Potter, the cross-dressing company clerk Klinger, and the gentle Father Mulcahy, who all end up working together at a chaotic veterans hospital in Missouri. The hype was enormous. The pilot episode was a massive ratings hit as millions of loyal fans tuned in, desperate for one more taste of their favorite show. But the magic faded almost instantly. The problem was that AfterMASH had all the characters of MASH, but none of its soul. The original show was a brilliant, razor-sharp blend of gut-busting comedy and heart-wrenching tragedy, set against the backdrop of war. AfterMASH was just a standard, bland hospital sitcom. Without the life-or-death stakes and the powerful anti-war commentary, it felt hollow and pointless. It ran for 2 seasons before being canceled and is now considered one of the biggest disappointments in television history. A powerful reminder that you can't just reheat a masterpiece and expect it to taste the same. 7. Holmes and Yo-Yo.
Thanks, Alex. I enjoyed it very much.
It took you 2 seconds to read a 300-page report?
Well, I'm a little out of practice.
In a premise that sounds like it was dreamed up by a malfunctioning AI after being fed a diet of bad 70s cop shows, the LAPD decides the best way to reduce officer injuries is to create a robot cop. The result is Yo-Yo, an android who is partnered with a very human, very exasperated detective, Alexander Holmes. Yo-Yo was programmed with every police manual ever written, but possessed zero common sense. He was, in essence, a walking, talking disaster area in a police uniform. Yo-Yo took everything literally, was prone to bizarre malfunctions, like compulsively taking a picture every time he heard the word cheese, or short-circuiting when hit with a splash of water, and generally caused more problems than he solved. His human partner, Holmes, had to keep Yo-Yo's robotic nature a secret from the public and their own captain, which was difficult when Yo-Yo was trying to arrest a fire hydrant for loitering or reading a suspect their Miranda rights in a perfect, soulless monotone. The show was a bizarre hybrid of a police procedural and a sci-fi comedy that satisfied neither audience. The jokes were painfully corny, and the laugh track felt like it was working overtime to convince you something funny was happening. It was canceled after just 13 episodes and is now a legendary flop, a prime example of a 70s TV concept so bad it's almost a work of art. 8. Co-ed fever.
I'm a boy.
Why don't we all go over to Dean McGee's house and glue his wife to the ceiling?
This show holds a special, sacred place in the Hall of Fame of television failures. It wasn't just a flop, it was an instant, spectacular flameout. Set at a formerly all-female college that has just started admitting men, Co-Ed Fever was a desperate, cynical attempt to cash in on the massive success of the movie National Lampoon's Animal House. It was filled with leering, lowbrow jokes, paper-thin characters with names like Mousy and Gobo, and a general vibe of cheap, desperate sleaze. It was everything crude about Animal House with none of the wit or charm. The show was so bad, so instantly reviled by the few critics who saw it and by the network itself, that it was canceled after its special preview airing. It never even made it to its regular time slot. It aired once on February 4, 1979, and was then immediately banished from the airwaves forever, like a cursed videotape. Most of the other shows on this list at least lasted a few weeks, giving audiences a chance to reject them. Co-ed Fever was rejected by its own network before the audience even had a say. Its legacy is that of the ultimate one-and-done failure, a show so terrible that the network pulled the plug before the first commercial break was even over. It's the television equivalent of a sprinter tripping over the starting block and face-planting into the track. 9. Mr. T and Tina. Before Pat Morita became the wise and beloved Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid, a role that earned him an Academy Award nomination, he was given the chance to be a sitcom star. Mr. T and Tina was a spin-off of the hit sitcom Welcome Back, Kotter, where Morita had a recurring role as the witty inventor Taro Takahashi. The new show saw his character, now renamed Mr. Toshiro Tanaka for reasons unknown, moved to Chicago with his family to work and live with his very Americanized sister-in-law. This show was groundbreaking as one of the very first American sitcoms to feature a predominantly Asian American cast. But a good intention doesn't automatically make a good show. The comedy was built on broad, uncomfortable stereotypes about Japanese culture clashing with American life. The writing was weak, the situations were contrived, and the show just wasn't funny. Despite its connection to the hugely popular Welcome Back, Kotter, the show was a massive ratings failure. It was canceled after only 5 episodes, becoming a forgotten footnote in television history and a huge missed opportunity to do something meaningful. Thankfully, Pat Morita would get another, far more iconic chance at stardom a few years later. 10. The Ted Knight Show.
I didn't mean big like you're big. I meant big like in heart. You have a big heart. You know, big.
You want to drop it?
Yes.
Ted Knight was a comedy legend, a multiple Emmy winner for his iconic role as the vain, incompetent, and hilariously insecure news anchor Ted Baxter on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. After that classic show ended its run, it was only natural that he would get his own series to headline. Unfortunately, the series he got was The Ted Knight Show, a sitcom that saw him as Hobart Hobie Gardy, the owner of a struggling escort service in New York City. Yes, you read that correctly. A wholesome, family-friendly escort service, but an escort service nonetheless. The premise was already questionable for a 1970s primetime sitcom, but the execution was even worse. The show was a chaotic mess of bad slapstick, double entendres that weren't clever enough to land, and a laugh track that sounded exhausted from the effort. It was a massive waste of Ted Knight's considerable talents, forcing him into situations that were neither funny nor charming. Audiences who loved him as the buffoonish Ted Baxter were either confused or turned off by the slightly sleazy premise. The show was a critical and commercial disaster, and it was yanked off the air after just 6 episodes. It stands as a powerful reminder that even a beloved, legendary TV star can't save a show with a fundamentally terrible idea at its core. 11. The Dumplings. This sitcom, produced by the legendary Norman Lear, the man who gave us All in the Family, The Jeffersons, and Good Times, was about a happily married, extremely overweight couple, Joe and Angela Dumpling, who run a small lunch counter in New York City. The entire premise of the show and nearly every single joke revolved around their weight. They were fat, they loved to eat, and that was the beginning and end of their characterization. The show was meant to be a sweet, heartwarming comedy about 2 people who were deeply in love despite the world's perceptions, but it came across as a one-note fat joke stretched out over 22 minutes. The laugh track would roar with delight every time a chair creaked under their weight or they joyfully devoured a large meal. The characters were defined by nothing other than their size, and the comedy felt lazy and, by today's standards, incredibly mean-spirited and cringeworthy. Despite Norman Lear's Midas touch, the show was a huge flop, canceled after only 10 episodes. It's a forgotten relic from an era when a person's body type was considered a perfectly acceptable and, in fact, the only premise for a sitcom. 12. The Waverly Wonders.
NBC Joe Namath in the Waverly Wonders as the teacher everyone wants to have.
I'll see you tomorrow.
But we got another 45 minutes.
You're kidding.
And the kind of man every woman wants.
You really think he's sex crazed?
In the 1970s, Broadway Joe Namath was one of the most famous athletes on the planet. He was a Super Bowl winning quarterback with movie star good looks, a fur coat, and a legendary off-field persona. So, naturally, a TV network decided he should be a sitcom star. In The Waverly Wonders, Namath played Harry Casey, a retired professional basketball player, not football for some reason, who takes a job as a history teacher and basketball coach at a struggling high school in Wisconsin. There was just one tiny, insignificant problem. Joe Namath couldn't act. At all. He delivered his lines with the wooden stiffness of a department store mannequin that had been left out in the rain. He had zero comedic timing and the screen presence of a potted plant. The show was built entirely around his celebrity, but his lack of acting ability made every scene an awkward, painful slog to get through. The show revolved around his interactions with a team of stereotypical misfit players, but the real misfit was the star himself, looking completely lost on his own set. The show was a ratings disaster and was canceled after only a handful of episodes, proving once again that athletic prowess does not in any way, shape or form, translate to sitcom stardom. Turnabout.
It's happening. It can't be happening.
Oh, it's happening. Trust me, it's happening. I am in your body and you're in mine.
Well, Sam, I want my body back.
The body swap comedy was a popular movie trope, giving us classics like Freaky Friday. So, in 1979, NBC decided to take that high concept and turn it into a weekly sitcom. In Turnabout, a married couple, Sam and Penny, who are constantly bickering about whose life is harder, magically switch bodies after an encounter with a strange statue in their living room. Sam, a gruff sports writer, suddenly finds himself in his wife's body, dealing with her high-powered job as a cosmetics executive. Penny, a sophisticated executive, finds herself in her husband's body, trying to navigate the macho world of sports journalism. The premise was good for a 90-minute movie, where the novelty and shock could carry the story. As a weekly series, it was a creative dead end. How many times can you make the same joke about a man trying to put on makeup or a woman trying to use a urinal? The show ran out of ideas almost immediately after the pilot. The central gimmick, which was the entire reason for the show's existence, became repetitive and boring by the second episode. Audiences quickly tuned out. The show was canceled after just 7 episodes, a fascinating failure that proved some high concepts are best left on the big screen where they belong. 14. Heil, honey, I'm home.
Okay. This is what we do. We get the Goldensteins tipsy so they fall asleep. Then we can bundle them back to their apartment. What could be simpler?
The dummy who thought of it.
This show isn't just a flop. It's a cursed artifact of television, a program so infamous that its very existence feels like a prank. It's the most breathtakingly, monumentally offensive, and ill-conceived sitcom ever created. This British show was presented as a lost parody of a classic 1950s American sitcom, complete with a laugh track and black and white presentation. The premise featured a husband and wife living in a quiet suburban home who are constantly annoyed by their wacky new neighbors. A standard setup. The twist? The main characters were Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, and their annoying new neighbors, the Goldensteins, were Jewish. You are not hallucinating. This was a real show that was funded and produced. It featured Hitler saying lines like, "Heil, honey, I'm home," to a wave of canned laughter. The central plot of the pilot episode involved Hitler trying to hide his Jewish neighbors from a visiting Neville Chamberlain whom he is trying to impress. The show was intended as a savage satire on the vapidness of sitcoms and the normalization of evil. But that message was completely lost in the abyss of its own terrible taste. Only the pilot episode ever aired in the UK. The public and critical backlash was so immediate, so overwhelming, and so full of pure horror that the remaining episodes were permanently locked in a vault, never to be seen again. It's the undisputed champion of what were they possibly thinking? Television. 15th, Checking In.
You know, Florence, in the 2 weeks that you've been here, you've made my life so much easier.
Really?
Yeah, you know, Mr. Block spends so much time yelling at you, he doesn't have time to yell at me anymore.
The Jeffersons was a massive, long-running hit, a cornerstone of CBS's lineup for a decade. One of its most popular and beloved characters was the sharp-tongued, wisecracking maid, Florence Johnston, played by the brilliant Marla Gibbs. Florence's sarcastic jabs at her pompous boss, George Jefferson, were a highlight of every episode. In 1981, CBS decided to give Florence her own spin-off. In Checking In, Florence leaves her job with the Jeffersons to become the executive housekeeper at the fictional St. Frederick Hotel in New York City. It seemed like a great idea on paper, but just like with Grady, Fish, and so many others, taking a beloved supporting character out of the environment that made them great is a recipe for disaster. Florence's comedy came from her specific interactions with the Jefferson family. When she was just managing a staff of maids in a hotel, the magic was gone. The situations were generic, the new characters were bland, and the show just wasn't funny. It was a ratings dud from the start. It was canceled after only 4 episodes, making it one of the shortest-lived spin-offs in history. Marla Gibbs was quickly and quietly brought back to the Jeffersons, and her brief, disastrous hotel career was never spoken of again. 16th Fish.
Where are you going?
Home.
You said you'd give it a chance.
I did. That's as much of a chance as I want to take.
This was a spin-off of the critically acclaimed sitcom Barney Miller, focusing on Detective Phil Fish, the perpetually grumpy, world-weary detective famous for his endless list of ailments and his constant need to use the bathroom. In the new series, Fish and his wife Bernice retire from the NYPD to run a group home for a diverse group of troubled foster kids. The man who complained about everything was now a full-time dad to 5 wisecracking delinquents who were designed to test his already non-existent patience. The idea of taking a beloved character, played by the iconic Abe Vigoda, and giving him his own show seemed like a sure thing. His deadpan delivery and hangdog expression were a highlight of every Barney Miller episode. But it turns out that a character who is hilarious in small, grumpy doses can become grating and depressing as the lead of a family show. Fish's constant complaining, which was the perfect spice in the ensemble of the 12th Precinct, just made him seem mean and miserable when directed at a group of foster kids. Abe Vigoda famously left a hit show for this spin-off only to see it canceled after a season and a half. In a sad final twist, he was never asked to return to Barney Miller, a move that reportedly stung him for years. 17. When the Whistle Blows.
Let's go, girls. Quick, quick, quick. Let's show Mr. Hammerman how appreciative we are for letting us use his construction site. It's Hammerhand, Ted.
This sitcom about a group of blue-collar construction workers was created by the legendary production team of Leonard Goldberg and Aaron Spelling, a duo responsible for dozens of massive hits like Charlie's Angels and Heart to Heart. With that kind of pedigree, it seemed like a can't-miss prospect, a show destined for a long and successful run. But it became a legendary example of network interference gone horribly, horribly wrong. ABC network executives reportedly hated the show before it even aired. They felt it was too bland and lacked excitement. So, in an infamous case of meddling, they forced the producers to completely reshoot the pilot and add a bizarre new element, a stunt of the week. In each episode, the construction workers would have to perform some kind of dangerous, death-defying feat, completely unrelated to the plot. The result was a Frankenstein's monster of a show, part workplace comedy, part amateur stunt show, that made absolutely no sense. Critics and audiences were baffled, and it was yanked off the air after just a handful of episodes, becoming a textbook example of how network meddling can kill a show before it even has a chance to breathe. 18. Casablanca.
I don't need you to tell me what I think. I sure hope not, because people can't be somebody else no matter how hard you try to change. You said enough.
Yes, you heard that right. In 1983, NBC decided to take one of the greatest, most iconic, and most beloved films of all time and adapt it into a weekly sitcom. Not even a gritty drama, but a light-hearted adventure series. David Soul, fresh off his fame from the gritty cop show Starsky and Hutch, was cast in the Humphrey Bogart role as Rick Blaine, the cynical owner of Rick's Café Américain in Casablanca. The show was a prequel to the film, set in the months leading up to the events of the movie. It featured younger versions of all the famous characters: Rick, his rival Captain Renault, the sinister Major Strasser, and even the piano player, Sam. The problem? You can't turn Casablanca into a weekly TV show. The film is a perfect, self-contained masterpiece of drama, romance, and political intrigue. The TV show was a flat, lifeless imitation that had none of the film's wit, charm, or danger. It felt like a bad high school play trying to recreate a classic. Audiences were either confused or offended by the sacrilege, and the show was canceled after only 5 episodes. It remains one of the most baffling and disrespectful adaptations in television history. 19. The Ugliest Girl in Town.
Occupation high fashion model. Ah, come on.
We're dipping back into the late 60s for this one, but its premise is so bizarrely ahead of its time and so spectacularly wrong that it feels like a 70s flop in spirit. The show is about a Hollywood talent agent who sees a photo of a shaggy-haired hippie in a London magazine and thinks he's the perfect it girl to be the next big female fashion model. The catch? The hippie is a man named Timothy, and the agent saw the photo right after Timothy got caught in a rainstorm, making his hair look long and feminine. Desperate for money to be with his girlfriend in Hollywood, Timothy agrees to the scheme. He puts on a wig and a mini dress, calls himself Timmy, and becomes the hottest fashion model in the world, all while trying to keep his true gender a secret from his new fiancée, the public, and the modeling agency. The show was a one-joke premise that was both confusing and deeply uncomfortable. It was a bizarre, gender-bending comedy that audiences in 1968 were absolutely not ready for. It was canceled after 1 season and has been almost completely erased from television history, a strange relic of a much different time. Puchinski.
Everybody loves somebody sometime. Everybody falls in love somehow.
Puchinski, how did you become a dog?
We end with a show that was such a spectacular flop, it never even made it to a full series. Puchinski was a failed pilot who has become a legend among connoisseurs of bad television, a true holy grail of terrible ideas. The premise: a tough, obnoxious, flatulent Chicago police detective named Stanley Puchinski is killed in the line of duty. But through some unexplained supernatural event, his soul is transferred into the body of a slobbering, equally flatulent bulldog. Now, as a talking dog, Puchinski insists on solving his own elimination, partnering up with his old police partner and offering gruff detective-style commentary from the body of a very uncooperative canine. The pilot, starring the great Peter Boyle as the voice of the dog, is a masterpiece of unintentional comedy. The puppetry used to make the dog talk is terrible, the jokes are awful, and the entire concept is so profoundly, deeply stupid that it's mesmerizing to watch. The pilot was so badly received that the network passed on the series, but it has lived on for decades in bootleg circles as a perfect example of a television idea so bad it had to be seen to be believed.